I keep my breath still so I'm steady. Keep my eyes fixed on the door. Keep a bullet in the chamber. Keep my feet firm on the floor. I keep the sky up high above me. Keep the road out, stretch and fall. It keeps my mind from going crazy. Keeps my heart from going cold. Just in case it rains. Just in case it rains.
By the end of the 19th century, America has emerged from strife. Wars on American soil, from the War of 1812 and the Civil War, in addition to American excursions in Mexico and Cuba, firmly put the nation on a path of self-determination. In the wake of the Civil War, American industry flourishes. Reconstruction and a need for unity help fuel the tide of American self-reliance, the waves of which hit the cutlery industry.
The term cutlery in the late 1800s and early 1900s referred to anything that had an edge on it. So draw shaves, hand planes, scissors, razors. So today we think of knives, forks, and spoons. Well, this is so much more than that.
Previously dominated by German and English interests, a floodgate of American enterprises soon take rise. Cutlers set up shop along the East Coast, clinging to the New England shoreline after immigrating to the United States. In 1859, an oil boom in northwestern Pennsylvania attracts investors and fuels a migration of skilled craftsmen out of the Northeast and into the rural landscape of western New York and northwestern Pennsylvania.
This area, when you go out within a 20-mile radius here, is a mecca for the early cutlery industry in the United States.
This migration lays the groundwork for some of the most recognizable names in the knife industry today. Most notable is the Case family. More than 30 cutlery operations connected to the Cases branch out over the span of a few decades. This dynasty begins with Job Case, whose daughter Emma is married to John W. Brown. Emma and John have 5 children: Wallace, Anna, Emerson, Ethel, and Everett. As grandsons of Job Case, Wallace and Emerson Brown are raised in Little Valley, or the Village of Knives, as it would come to be known. At age 19, Wallace Brown becomes a traveling salesman for the Robeson Cutlery Company.
Wallace Brown originally started out as a salesman, as a wagon jobber. Wallace's mom was a Case, so he was familiar with cutlery and where cutlery is being sold, a lot of it in the South. So he traveled around the South in a horse-drawn carriage and took his wares and peddled them. That's where the roots of this company came from. In that, though, if that wouldn't have happened, he also wouldn't have understood sales channels and product and the quality as much as he did for his own ventures when he ended up doing it.
In 1894, Wallace starts his own mail-order cutlery business based out of his home in Little Valley. He calls this business the Union Razor Company. Wallace is soon joined by his brother, Emerson. The Brown brothers open a warehouse in Little Valley, where they rent space to the many cutlery companies in the area to store their products. In addition to storing various products for other companies, Wallace and Emerson form their own cutlery company, Brown Brothers Razor. They contract with local manufacturers to produce products that bear the Brown name. However, this enterprise is short-lived.
This company ended in terrible failure. Today, there is no official documents or any kind of official or legal mention of Brown Brothers Razor Company that we can find anywhere in the county archives and the company archives. So it was almost like they wanted to wipe that chapter out of history entirely.
In less than 3 years, Brown Brothers Razor shutters operations. Defeated, Wallace, Emerson, and father, John Brown, go to work for the Cattaraugus Cutlery Company, another offshoot of the Case family. In Tityute, Pennsylvania, a small knife shop also struggles to make ends meet.
At the end of the 1800s, the cutlery industry was dominated by German and English interests. It had a long track record for quality, and that was kind of the gold standard. So American-made cutlery was kind of looked at as that second tier. Now with the passing of the Dingley Act, that all changed. Tariffs went up upwards of 50% on a lot of items, most notably cutlery. So as such, cutlery work sprang up all over Western New York, Northern Pennsylvania. Most of these companies, they came and they went. It was a very hard business to be successful in. There was so many companies doing the same kind of knives, the same kind of designs, that there just wasn't room for everybody.
In 1897, in an attempt to keep their cutlery businesses alive, 38 men agree to form a partnership known as the Tityute Cutlery Company Limited.
The Tityute Cutlery Company, legally anyways, was formed in 1897 by 38 men, most notably H. Cummins, who was a Civil War hero, fought in 16 battles during the Civil War. Now, there's strong evidence to suggest that this company was a much older, upwards of 20 years earlier this company may have started. We don't know if that original company was called the Tityute Cutlery Company, but we do know that in 1897, after this meeting, it was formally called the Tityute Cutlery Company.
In 1898, the company begins manufacturing knives. This lays the foundation of the company that will become K-Bar. In 1902, Wallace Brown works on starting his own cutlery manufacturer in Tityute named the Union Razor Company of Tityute, an offshoot of his Union Razor sales company in Little Valley, New York. While Wallace waits for the paperwork on his new manufacturing operation, an unexpected opportunity arises. The Brown brothers receive news that the Tityute Cutlery Company is struggling, as several businessmen in the company redirect their financial support to more lucrative enterprises in oil and timber. The Tityute Cutlery Company's finances are gutted. Backed by local businessman and Civil War hero Henry Cummings, Wallace personally buys out the stock of the fledgling Tityute Cutlery Company in January 1902.
One of the maybe major lessons we take out of this is they were never scared to fail. And they failed a lot. But they also succeeded a lot. They always stood back up. And they never quit. They kept going. And that's a lesson that we take forward here is it's all right to fail. It's all right to lose. Don't quit.
Four months later, when the Union Razor Company of Tityute is legally organized, Wallace transfers the assets of the Tityute Cutlery Company to Union Razor. In April of 1902, the company holds its first stockholders meeting. Wallace is named president of the newly formed company, and his father John is appointed secretary and treasurer. Henry Cummings, instrumental in the Browns' rise to prominence in Tityute, is appointed vice president and manages business operations. Wallace combines both companies and names the newly formed organization the Union Razor Company, the name of Wallace Brown's former sales company.
The Tityute Company is no more. The Union Razor Company is born.
Union Razor was initially a sales company for the Brown brothers, which did in fact turn into more of a manufacturing arm through the Tityute Cutlery Company. So the Tityute Cutlery Company was the factory, but there was all kinds of different stamps that came out of that. today you can still find, stamps that say the Union Razor, Brown Brothers Razor, Titty Cutlery. So they used a large number of names to denote what seemed to be similar operations.
The Brown family now controls the Union Razor Company. They manufacture straight razors and a small assortment of pocket knives. As society changes, Wallace Brown changes with it. Hunting and the outdoors in general become romanticized by popular figures like Teddy Roosevelt. The well-groomed gentleman, straight razor at the ready, is slowly replaced by the rugged outdoorsman.
Using a name like Union Razor kind of paints you into a corner. If you only want to do straight razors, it probably works very well. But the Brown family, they wanted to do more than that. They wanted to do hunting knives, pocket knives. They wanted to keep doing straight razors as well, but they wanted to have a more diverse product line.
No longer content that the Union Razor Company name is an adequate moniker, Wallace Brown changes the company name. In 1909, he removes the word razor, and the company name is changed to the Union Cutlery Company. This shift reverberates throughout the product line. Though still producing straight razors, the number of hunting knives increases.
To work in the cutlery industry during this time period, it really had to have been a labor of love. It was pretty unforgiving work, so to continue to do this, particularly the Brown family, who had already been knocked down once with the failure of Brown Brothers Razor, they must have really loved what they were doing.
The world is changing at an ever faster pace. Determined to keep up, Wallace Brown and the Union Cutlery Company make a fateful decision.
Mr. Brown, welcome to Olean.
The ramifications of which can still be seen today. Wallace and Emerson Brown, born in Little Valley, New York in the late 1800s, are determined to begin their own cutlery company. After a number of different ventures, the Brown brothers eventually begin manufacturing and selling knives under the name Union Cutlery Company. The Union Cutlery Company's success does not go unnoticed. In September 1910, the Olean, New York Chamber of Commerce approaches Wallace Brown and asks him to consider moving his cutlery company to Olean. Armed with tax incentives, land, and a building, the chamber makes Wallace an offer he can't refuse.
According to the Olean newspaper, there was a large push to add 50 new businesses to the city of Olean. And I believe they had about 1 week time period to do this. So, as terms of doing this, you had the Union Cutlery move to Olean, but subsequently you also had another company called American Home. Now, further research shows that Union Cutlery and American Home were in the same building. And strangely enough, Wallace Brown was the president of Union Cutlery. Emerson Brown was the president of American Home. And when you dig deeper, Emerson was the vice president of Union Cutlery, and Wallace was the vice president of American Home. Subsequently, another business popped up called the John Brown Sons Company, who was listed was to manufacture straight razors and knives. Basically the same thing Union Cutlery and American Home are already doing, but again, it helped the Olean Chamber of Commerce hit their goal of 50 new businesses, but to say they were different businesses, probably only in name.
By January 1911, the Union Cutlery Company begins to move operations to Olean. Though a skeleton operation remains in Tittyute, the majority of operations are now based in Western New York. The move to Olean proves to be a success, and Union Cutlery knives are used by hunters and outdoorsmen across the country. After a number of years in Olean, Wallace Brown receives a package containing the fur of a Kodiak bear and a letter from an Alaskan hunter thanking the Union Cutlery Company for their outstanding knives.
So the lore passed down to us when we purchased the company was that the K-bar name came from kilobar. The truth was never really totally known until recently. 20 years after we purchased the company, we unearthed a document that we had not found before, and it was a manual written by the grandson of one of the original owners of Union Cut. And in there, it specifically references the letter that was sent in to K-Bar from a trapper, killing a Kodiak bear with his knife once his gun jammed, corroborating the K-Bar story.
Inspired by the hunter story, Wallace combines K.A. for Kodiak and Bar for bear to create the name K-Bar. He trademarks the name K-Bar in January 1924. Union Cutlery begins to use the K-Bar name on a wide range of cutlery, particularly hunting knives. The future of the Union Cutlery Company is bright. Wallace has a young son who, despite a wild streak, shows interest in the family business. Richard Danforth Brown was born in 1908. Danforth, as he's known to friends and family, spends his early years learning the ropes of the cutlery industry. During the 1920s, Danforth is sent to 3 different military schools to build discipline and prepare Danforth for his future in the business world. The future comes faster than the Brown family could have ever imagined. In 1924, at the age of 49, Wallace Brown, the founder and driving force of Union Cutlery, passes away. His brother and longtime business partner Emerson assumes the leadership of Union Cutlery. During his time as president of the company, Emerson designs and patents a number of unique knives.
Emerson is credited to many of the patents, the early patents that K-Bar made. Knife with a light, knife with a compass. These were things that he owned the patents on in the early 1900s, way before they were ever in vogue. Many of them never took off because they were way too radical for the time, that nobody thought that this was something that they could do. He had the ability to be creative and get out of the box before there even was a box, and really push the boundaries of what manufacturers and product people were doing at the time.
Despite Emerson's best efforts, America is in the midst of the greatest economic depression the United States has ever experienced. American Home, a close affiliate of Union Cutlery, dissolves in July 1928. Union Cutlery sales fall. Although Emerson guides the company through the rocky economic environment, the Brown family suffers another devastating loss when Emerson Brown passes away unexpectedly on February 4, 1934. With his father and uncle gone, Danforth, at age 26, assumes the role of president of the Union Cutlery Company. Danforth is forced to lead a company in a horrific business climate with the weight of his family, the company, and the community on his shoulders.
So you have Wallace and Emerson both dying at a fairly young age and leaving their company in the hands of Danforth Brown, who I believe was in his mid-20s when he's left to run this company. This is in the middle of the Great Depression, starting to get into major military conflicts across the world. I'm sure it was a heavy situation.
As long-standing American companies shutter their operations, Union Cutlery survives the 1930s under young Danforth Brown's guidance.
Danforth Brown led the company through the Great Depression and brought them right up to World War II and had them prepared and on a good footing to prosper.
Surviving the Great Depression allows for expansion in the 1940s. War looms on the horizon. When it comes time to produce combat knives for the U.S. military, Union Cutlery has the skill, equipment, and infrastructure in place to produce and deliver products that contribute to the war effort.
So World War II, and the War Board goes to essentially anybody who can manufacture anything. And whatever your product was that you made, you stopped making, and now you started making products for the war effort. The knife companies, they all made military and war fighting knives.
Union Cutlery is just one of a number of cutlery companies that supplied troops with combat knives. The most famous, the 1219 C2, or USMC Fighting Utility Knife, is designed, refined, and submitted for approval to the U.S. government by USMC Captain Howard America, USMC Colonel John Davis, and Danforth Brown. Danforth decides to use the K-Bar trademark on products made for U.S. troops.
Most of the companies that were producing these products, it would have a name on it, their company name, or it could be a town, and say USMC. K-Bar was one of the only ones that had a trademark name on it that wasn't their company name.
This collaboration forms the foundation of K-Bar's relationship with the United States Armed Forces.
A lot of people, when they see a K-Bar, they say, boy, that's quite a fearsome weapon, a pretty amazing knife to use in possibly a hand-to-hand situation in combat. But for most soldiers, it's a utilitarian use. The basic uses of any knife in use in the wilderness and in the woodline. A lot of folks used them for preparing hooches, as we call them, or shelters in the woods. Use them for preparing food, whether it's dressing in field game in the woods or cutting down bamboo shoots. Very many more utilitarian uses actually for the K-Bar than actual combat uses.
Union Cutlery isn't the first to produce the 1219 C2, and they don't make the most of the combat knife. But according to troops in the field, they make the best version.
A lot of soldiers and Marines, when they came back from the Pacific, brought their K-Bars with them and refused to leave them behind. They brought their knives home, and I think its performance in the Pacific, at places like Tarawa and Peleliu and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, I think its performance there really sealed its reputation for rugged durability and for quality, for a high-quality knife. And a lot of Marines today swear by them. We talk to Marines, 80, 90-year-old guys that still have their K-Bars at home.
Despite the different manufacturers, American troops begin to refer to all fixed-blade style knives as K-Bars.
The name has become iconic. The sound of the name, I believe, has made an impression on people. But also, the style of knife is common in World War II in a number of manufacturers, but K-Bars knives were the ones especially manufactured here in Olean were much more durable. They were stronger. They were a better knife. I can actually tell you, when I was in Special Forces in the qualification course, you were allowed to take one knife with you for your journey into the wilderness for a week, and most of us picked a K-Bar.
In May 1952, Union Cutlery officially changes its name to K-Bar.
We changed the name to K-Bar because it became so popular after World War II. Union Cut was the company during World War II. So for a brand to become so popular that you change your brand name to it, that's pretty cool.
Due to the uncertainty on how long World War II will last, a surplus of Union Cutlery marked K-Bars are made. So many, in fact, that after 1945, another K-Bar USMC fighting utility knife will not be made until the 1970s. The surplus K-Bars do not sit idle for long. Wars in Korea and Vietnam eventually put the World War II knives back into the hands of American soldiers.
Soldiers in Korea wanted to know what the guys in World War II carried. It's a word of mouth a lot of times. You see Grandpa carried a K-Bar in the Pacific. I'm leaving for Afghanistan. What should I carry? And it becomes a family thing. It's a trust issue. And once again, it goes down to quality. People trust that K-Bar knife. The brand has been established. People know K-Bar, that's quality. They don't have to second guess. They don't have to wonder if it's going to break. They know it's a good knife because, you know what, Grandpa carried one on Iwo Jima. So if it was good enough for Grandpa in the Pacific in World War II, it's good enough for me.
Although K-Bar experiences a surge in name recognition, once World War II ends, the demand for fighting knives fades.
For any wartime manufacturer, it's a very hard transition to get back to what they were doing before the war, particularly when they've made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these products. So it was difficult to assimilate themselves back into the civilian marketplace. And the companies that couldn't do it went away. The companies that could flourish, and many of those are still around today.
After decades of stability, Danforth Brown and K-Bar face a changing marketplace and once again struggle to keep the company afloat. Just like his father, Danforth Brown is faced with difficult decisions that will impact K-Bar forever. Danforth Brown has seen the Union Cutlery Company through the Great Depression and World War II. He capitalizes on the popularity of the USMC fighting knife and the K-Bar name.
the end of World War II, there was millions of knives in circulation around the globe that were known as K-bars, whether they were actually K-bars or not. Trying to capitalize on that, Union Cutlery changed their name to K-bar in 1952. Now, the problem was the market had changed. Instead of military knives, utility knives, it had kind of gone back to that pre-war need for hunting knives, pocket knives, and Union Cutlery was forced to adapt.
Just as his father, Wallace Brown, had been approached by Olean, New York officials to move his cutlery operation, Danforth is courted by representatives from Dawsonville, Georgia, in a bid to relocate his company.
Danforth found himself in a very similar position to Wallace before him. He had this very intriguing offer in front of him to move the company, only this time it wasn't 30 miles away. It was 1,000 miles away, far away from their home base, where they were from, where their family was from. So it had to have been quite a decision, and I'm sure he didn't take it lightly.
Tax incentives, inexpensive property, and the prospect of cheap labor give Danforth Brown optimism that this is the right move for the survival of K-Bar. In 1954, he moves K-Bar to Dawsonville, Georgia, under a 20-year agreement.
K-Bar relocates, Danforth Brown moves down to Georgia, and he quickly finds that this probably isn't going to work out. One of the reasons for this not working out was the workforce. Good, hardworking people, but unfortunately, the surrounding area was mainly farmland, and these were families that had for generations been farmers. Their crops were very important to them, so if they had to tend to their farm, they would leave and tend to their farm. At the time, it wasn't really set up for a factory manufacturing environment, and as such, they often found the plant shorthanded and were scrambling for workers to do the necessary and vital operations.
A disinterested workforce and slumping sales put Danforth Brown and the officers of K-Bar in a precarious position. This is a pivotal moment for K-Bar. Danforth has taken a gamble, and it has failed. He can admit defeat, close the company, and simply walk away, or make another bold move.
Quickly overwhelmed, there was only one choice Danforth Brown had: to relocate back to Olean, New York. Fortunately, the factory was still in place, much of the equipment was still there, the workforce with all of their knowledge were here as well, so it was a pretty seamless transition back. Fortunately for him, that probably saved the company.
After being in Georgia for only 2 years, the Dawsonville operation is closed, and K-Bar limps back to Olean, New York.
K-Bar's return to Olean was quite a homecoming. That had to have been something that was very reassuring for Danforth and for really much of the staff here. That was a big part of the community that had been suddenly taken away, and for them to return home, that was a very positive thing for Western New York.
Despite his miscalculation on the move to Georgia, Danforth Brown has crafted the company into a globally known brand. On March 3, 1960, Danforth Brown dies, bringing an end to over 6 decades of Brown family leadership. It was Danforth's father, Wallace, and uncle, Emerson, who built the company from scrap. Danforth's grandfather, John, helped his sons grow a cutlery dynasty from the ashes of failed businesses and manufacturing ventures.
After Danforth Brown passes, the company changes hands several times, from local Olean businessmen to other knife companies to what we would consider today to be conglomerates. The death of Danforth Brown marked the end of the Brown cutlery dynasty and really marked the beginning of a turbulent time in the company history.
K-Bar sales begin to decline. Several Olean businessmen step up in an attempt to fill the leadership void. However, the decline continues. A series of owners also jump at the chance to own a piece of the World War II legend. But all suffer the same fate: failure. K-Bar enters into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Dick Sturm, a longtime K-Bar employee, is appointed to run K-Bar on behalf of the bank.
One of the key employees during this time period was a man named Dick Sturm, who started at K-Bar in the 1940s and had subsequently rose to run the newly created K-Bar Collectors Club. And He was a great resource for history, from firsthand history, but also really tried to gather up documents and anything that could be of value down the road. So we're very much indebted to him today for what he did during his time at K-Bar.
Although K-Bar files for Chapter 11, the Robinson Knife Company purchases the K-Bar assets from the bank before the company can be reorganized. Despite bankruptcy, K-Bar operations continue without delay. The Robinson Knife Company prevents the total collapse of K-Bar, but a declining marketplace does not allow them to capitalize on their investment. After only 2 years, Robinson Knife Company sells K-Bar to the Cole National Corporation, an outdoor conglomerate of Cleveland, Ohio.
Once K-Bar ultimately left Olean, it went to Cole Consumer Products. It largely became a brand that sourced all of its products, and they sourced it from a variety of places: Pakistan, China, Ireland, and the products that were in the line were much of a shell of what it used to be.
Armed with an aggressive business plan, Cole National begins to diversify the K-Bar lineup. The company focuses on inexpensive pocket knives that look similar to Union cutlery patterns from the early 1900s. Products are sourced from the Far East and stamped with several variances of the K-Bar name. Slowly but steadily, sales begin to stabilize.
So during this time period, there were several different stamps used for K-Bar knives, many of which you will see still today. Today we use the all capital letters with the hyphen between the K and the bar. During this time period, they experimented with everything from all lowercase letters to losing the hyphen entirely, to marks that said things like K-Bar International, different lines like Saber, and this was just kind of a way to delineate the different features of these knives.
Cole National keeps the K-Bar brand alive for nearly 2 decades. K-Bar continues to operate at a modest clip. However, it lacks the dynamic growth an organization like Cole National demands. In the mid-1990s, Cole National puts K-Bar up for sale.
K-Bar did hit a rough patch again, and it was something where it ran a very real possibility of the company going away entirely, whether that was being bought and taken offshore or just eliminated completely. The future was very uncertain.
Olean, New York is also home to another cutlery company, Cutco, the cooking utensil company. By the 1990s, Cutco, then known as Alcas, is in a position to acquire K-Bar and provide the stability that K-Bar needs to survive.
In 1996, Bon Brian Schreiber, who headed K-Bar, had called Jim Stitt, my father, who ran Alcas, and told him that K-Bar would potentially be for sale. And Dad talks about the purchase of the company from Alcas as a decision of the heart, not of the head. Cutco had been making the marine combat knife since 1975 for Cole Consumer Products, and it was the logical choice that a Olean-based company buy a former Olean-based company, and one that happened to be one of their primary vendors at the time.
After 30 years, K-Bar ownership returns to Olean. In May 1996, Cutco Cutlery purchases K-Bar from Cole National Corporation, rescuing an American icon.
There's no way around it. Alcas saved K-Bar knives. It brought K-Bar truly home, put the home office back in Olean, New York. Without their intervention, K-Bar probably would have went away.
In 1996, when they purchased K-Bar, I was 20 years old, and at the time working in the Cutco factory. They needed some employees to help out in the shipping department. I was one of the first employees hired by K-Bar and became their main picker, packer, shipper of all the raw materials and finished products that were getting sent out the door for the orders at the time.
Under the Cutco umbrella, initial K-Bar offerings are limited. The USMC Fighting Utility Knife is the centerpiece of K-Bar's rebirth.
I think there'll always be a need for a good knife and for combat soldiers. It's just that way it is. As we move more forward with technology, and they talk about push-button warfare and drones and all these kind of things, and the technology advances to a point where they're talking about autonomous tanks and aircraft, you're always going to need guys on the ground. There's always the need for the infantry, for soldiers that can take ground and hold ground. And when that comes down to it, it goes right back to the basics of hand weapons and tools like that. And of course, if it ever comes down to it, it could come down to hand in hand, and you're going to want a good blade on your side, and that's going to have to be a K-bar for most guys.
The attacks on American soil on September 11, 2001, plunged the United States into global conflict.
One of the real big turning points for the company was in 2003 when we got involved in multiple operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The knife that came to the forefront again was the K-bar. It reintroduced this legend to a new generation of warriors because pound for pound, it's still the best value on the market when it comes to just an all-purpose utility knife. The design is timeless, and it still does exactly what it does today, what it did then, and does it well.
A surge in demand creates the conditions and capital to expand K-bar's product line. More knives are made in Olean, New York, creating jobs and fostering a sense of pride in American manufacturing.
The product line slowly was built back up under LCAS, and when it started, it was just the 1217 USMC fighting utility knife. That did expand due to demand to the US Army and the US Navy, for a brief period of time the US Coast Guard as well. One thing that never really changed throughout all of these transitions in the company history was the K-bar name, the K-bar reputation, the tradition that was behind it, the way that it is revered throughout families from veterans, and the overall American growth has been astronomical.
The K-bar family grows to include custom knife designers from around the country.
The advent of custom knife makers became in vogue probably the 80s when custom knife makers and manufacturers started collabing and getting together and producing products that were different than what just the company would do by itself. For us, there was none of that until 1996 when we bought the company. And we started with Bob Dozier, then moved on with John Benner at TDI, Ethan Becker, Jesse Jars, Mike Snowdy, Steve Johnson. All of these persons have a different element about them that they're trying to relate to the consumer and say, this is who I am, this is what I do. And for us, it was trying to find people that had stories that identified with their consumer base, like our stories identify with our consumer base.
In 2014, K-bar acquires another World War II knife icon in Eck Commando Knife. Subsequent collaborations under the Eck umbrella with Spartan Blades and Jesse Jarez expand the K-bar footprint. Today, K-bar continues to evolve. The fighting utility product line continues to form the backbone of the K-bar brand. New products, such as the K-bar Spork, combined with the K-bar Master Series, have diversified K-bar offerings.
We've spent quite a bit of time over the last 5, 6, 7 years really creating an environment of change and willingness to change internally with our employees. Our employees know who we are, they know what the brand stands for, they know what we do, but it's to not get so tied down in the muck that you're scared to change and be fluid, because we've seen that so many times with this company over the timeline of it that's when it fails, when you get so scared that you just do the status quo. And we've got wonderful employees here, Cutco, everybody who's involved in everything with K-bar, they get it, they get what this thing is, and they like to be a part of this thing that can evolve and change and move and be something else. I don't know where it will be in 5 years, I don't know where it will be in 10 years, but it's a whole lot of fun being part of it and watching it change and watching your young employees come in, have an idea on something. It's like, okay, let's try it.
April 2018 represents 120 years in the K-bar story. The K-bar story is about more than just knives. It represents family, duty, tradition, ingenuity, resilience, and pride.
When I think of a K-bar knife, I think of kind of like a historic value. You know, it's been around for a long time. It's something that's been proven. It's got the history. You know, whatever design may be out, whatever new features or whatever it might be the newest thing, but it's still got that history and proven capability.
I'm a history buff, so you know, I think of the history behind that and how many young kids relied on their K-bar. And you know, to them, a K-bar was more than just a knife. And I think that's why every knife out there in that pattern is a K-bar. You know, and that definitely says something for the brand.
If you were to go downtown in the Strip right now with a whiteboard and take random individuals, 50 of them as they walk by, give them 6 seconds to draw a knife on a whiteboard, and you were to superimpose those over the top of each other, you'd probably have something that looked like a K-bar knife. I mean, K-bar's been around so long, and it's such an iconic brand. For those that don't live in the knife industry, those that don't collect or don't use them, their first thought of a knife is either one of two things: a kitchen knife or a K-bar.
K-bar's one of the few cutlery companies that's lasted the test of time. They're making the same product, and they continue to improve upon that product every year, and it's just a legendary company. It's one of those companies that's an icon in America.
It's a knife of American myth, and it's been in every war we've been in since the early parts of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, every little outlying event, military event, there have been K-bars there. And the good ones are actually made by K-bar.
Despite the many setbacks, K-bar has always picked itself up from the canvas and continued the fight, a fitting tribute to the example set by Wallace, Emerson, and John Brown.
The story of K-bar isn't always a pretty one. It's not always one that has a clear line from point A to point B, but it's one that we're very proud of, and it's one that we hope that we're continuing to write, that we're pushing it forward, that 120 years from now, we'll be having a similar conversation, just the faces have changed.
So to sit here today and to work on a project like this is so important on multiple levels. Because as we dig through this history and we flip over rocks and find nuggets and try to piece things back together, we're doing our due diligence to pass the stories forward the best we know and to help out the longevity of this company and the story of this company and the lore and everything that comes along with it, to make sure that the stories get told and the stories remain.
Well, the morning comes on fast when you're just above the water, so you wake up with a gasp. Well, the morning comes on slow when you wake up in your mansion on the end of Holy Road. And I wonder, as I sit in the seat of this old Chevy that I broke my back to get, I watch the sunrise on this town, watch the good guys go to work while guys like me are coming down. chose this life when it chose me, but it looks different to me now than how it used to on TV. I've seen the world, made some friends, almost lost the girl I love about a dozen times since then.